Welcome back. Well, for many families, this time of year brings big transitions. Sending a child off to college. It can be an exciting milestone, but also an emotional one for both the child and for the families. Here to help us navigate the transition is parenting strategist and founder of Pulse Parents, Dr. Madeleine Gagnon. Dr. Gagnon, thanks for coming on the show again.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so you have 5 conversations that every parent should be having with their teens before they leave. Let's start with number 1, independence and expectations.
Yeah, I think, what happens so often is the prep for college becomes about the bedding and the books and the U-Haul and the flight there, that it often gets overshadowed by what a huge milestone it is in terms of just young adulting. And so I think the first conversation that parents really need to hone in on is this newfound real independence. Like, this is the first time your kid's really gonna have to do their own adult management. And where I see young adults struggle most is with time management. All of a sudden, no one's really micromanaging. When are you home? Did you turn that assignment in? And that can be really overwhelming for a young adult. So really talking to them about the time management, not only of the academics versus friends versus, avid social life, but just all the other basics, like how to refill your albuterol inhaler, or how to, manage Bank of America deposits, or, just all those kind of basic things that so many parents today take care of for their teens.
Where do you draw the line of mom or dad calling and checking in and saying, hey, I checked your bank account, you're really close to being overdrawn, or, I checked your schedule, it looks like you're a little busy on Mondays, maybe you should back it up. Where do you draw the line in stepping in once they've already left?
Well, you know your kids and your teens' preparedness, right? You knew how much they could take on as a senior in high school, for example. So helping that transition. If you had a wildly independent teenager, they may not need any kind of micromanagement or oversight. If you've had someone who really kind of in a laddered approach needed more supports as years went on, I wouldn't just drop that support as we start here in the fall, but perhaps kind of scale that through various quarters as the year goes on.
Okay, so just kind of talking to them about how are we going to manage your newfound freedom?
Correct, right.
Not just sending them off into the world and hoping they figure it out.
Right, and there's so many things that parents don't think about. Like we said, the prescription refills, or did they get the right debit card, or basic kind of management things that even parents are forgetting to ensure their young adult knows.
And normalizing stress and homesickness is something that you think you should talk about ahead of time.
Well, interestingly, UCLA did a study that showed that over 70% of college students in the first year experience homesickness. Washington University did a same study and showed over 91%. Statistics aside, that shows that most college kids experience homesickness. Now, this conversation, I almost say, is directed to parents. Don't panic, right? You're invariably probably going to get a phone call from your son or daughter, and they may be overwhelmed, they may be in tears, they maybe think this is the wrong choice. To not necessarily knee-jerk react to that, should I drive down, should I rescue them, should they fly home for the weekend, really just providing some degree of reassurance that this is a big transition, it's normal to feel unsure, and as college kids get more plugged into their friends, new routine, we see those feelings dissipate. That's not to underscore that if you think your child is really suffering with anxiety and depression, seek proper supports. But by and large, it is normal that you're going to get at least one call or text that has the shadows of homesickness, and to not be thrown off by that, to expect that.
So what should you do when your son or daughter calls and says, yeah, I've been having a great time, but I miss you, Mom? What do you do?
Well, one, be glad they missed you, right? You're doing something right. But I think also just a listening ear. I hear you, because there's also probably a lot of other things at play. They're fatigued. They're not getting enough sleep. They were out late the night before. They're overwhelmed because they have their first test on Monday. There may be other contributing stressors too that are kind of fueling this fire. So just listening, helping them kind of see the trees from the forest, of saying, hey, this is all new. Let's just take it a day at a time. Encouraging them to get connected in their routines and their friendships, which is why I would refrain in those first 10 weeks, especially from trying to kind of come in and say, oh, why don't you come home this weekend? Or I'll fly down and take you out to lunch. Try to kind of pull back from kind of that rescuing and a little bit of push.
That's tough, Maddie. I think my instinct would be get on the first flight.
Mine too, but my better judgment as a pediatrician tells me pull back.
So give them some space to figure it out. Maybe check in with them the next day. Say, hey, how you doing after that conversation we had?
Yeah.
Okay, good advice. Relationships and intimacy. We've talked about this here on the show. This is a conversation that I think gets missed a lot with parents, but an important one.
Yeah, this is a tough one. So buckle up on this one. We do know that about 1 in 6 women and 1 in 16 men are subject to either attempted or completed sexual assault. We see most sexual assaults happen within the first year of college. And kind of alarmingly, we see that happen most often in the fall season. So that August to November of that first year of college. So I think first and foremost, just arm your kids with knowledge that, listen, this can happen. It is more prevalent on college campuses as school's starting. There are multiple factors that can add to risks of being in those situations, but be mindful that that can happen. If you're in a situation like that, how are different strategies to handle those situations and kind of what are next steps from that? But at least if you're talking about that, you're getting your college student thinking about, oh, I didn't even realize that could be the case. I thought this college was safe. It doesn't mean it's not safe. It just means being smart about what's out there. I will also say it's also a time to talk to your to-be college student about sexual health. We do know that teens ages 15 to young adults age 24 do represent the highest rate of new STIs or sexually transmitted infections. So while they represent only 19% of the population, they do represent 45 to 50% of new diagnosed sexually transmitted infections. So it's just really smart to be talking about how do you prevent such infections? How do you treat such infections? How do you recognize those things?
So how do you talk consent? When you explain consent to them, is that a signed document? Is that just like, yes, I agree? How do you explain consent as a parenting expert to a teenager?
I think like we've talked about in weeks prior, consent really, we'd love it to have it as a piece of paper, but that's not so practical at the parties, right? And so it's important to talk to your kid about both when they're seeking consent from someone or being asked to give consent, of really understanding that they're not feeling pressured to be in that relationship or to be in that interaction of intimacy, to really feel that this is where they want to be, this is a decision they want to make, they recognize the consequences from these decisions, and are really knowing that they can change their mind at any time, and that saying yes to one thing doesn't mean you're saying yes to everything, and really helping teens and young adults think and talk about that, because I think again it's uncomfortable for parents to think about their kids in those situations. Mm-hmm. I get that's not what we all want to think about sometimes as parents, but it's really important to at least have these conversations so you get the wheels turning in our young adults' minds, thinking, okay, let me think through some of these situations.
And kind of on the same vein, we've got the digital footprint that you have to think about. Talk to your kids about their digital footprint, and what they're posting on social media is a piece of advice from you before they leave.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would dovetail that also with substance use, particularly alcohol. So we know that hazing happens approximately 55% in that first year of college, whether it's sport, Greek life, a club. And so we know that hazing can be an area of negative peer pressure. We do know that unfortunately on average since 2020 we've had 5 hazing deaths a year on average. That's 5 too many. And so recognizing that hazing can be something from humiliation to something much more life-threatening, that we want to talk to our college kids about that. We also want to dovetail that alcohol use is frequently involved in that, and 1 in 4 college kids currently report binge drinking on a monthly basis. And so alcohol use is a part of the college culture fabric, and just being realistic about how we talk about that so that they can make safe choices and be responsible in those moments, along with the fact that now most everything from hazing to partying to drinking can be recorded either in photos or in videos and reels. And that, unlike when we were in college, that now follows you. That's not only a permanent record should there be any nefarious activity, but it's also a permanent record when you're applying to job or graduate school or parenting your own kids in the future. So just being thoughtful of both the choices for your own safety as a college student and then future reputational risks.
So just a gentle reminder to your kids, like, don't put anything on social media that your mother wouldn't approve of.
That's a good litmus test. Yeah, I think stick to that, and be mindful that other people may take your photos or upload things without your consent around that. And so trying to be more thoughtful. I just think it's such an important conversation to keep our young people talking about because we haven't yet quite seen these are the teens and young adults now aren't yet in their 30s and 40s, applying and navigating their professional careers. But I think that'll be an interesting wave to watch, and we'll probably see a lot come from that.
So I want to go back to what you talked about with hazing and alcohol. How do you suggest parents allow their teens some freedom to explore? That's part of the process of going to college, right? But also say, don't do that. I mean, because the binge drinking especially and the hazing. So how do you tell your kid, like, go out and explore, but don't go too far? I just don't know where do you find that balance?
Ultimately, they're not going to seek your permission. Right now, they're no longer, especially if they're not commuting to college, but away at college, they're no longer under your roof. You won't really have a say in the matter. So at this point, it's about having smart, warm, supportive communication and connection, which is the fifth topic, with your kid, about ensuring your voice is in their head at those tough moments. And recognizing at least you're empowering them with knowledge. I have seen a significant number of cases of intoxication and impairment related to some of these choices where a young adult is saying, I didn't know this. We've never really talked about this. I didn't really realize I could get into this kind of situation. Obviously, this is kind of aftermath discussion, which I find unfortunate. No young adult should come to someone like myself afterwards and say, I didn't even really think about this situation. I want young adults at least thinking about these situations so that when they're in it and they're making decisions, that they're at least informed in the decision they're making, because most are now 18 or over and really are responsible for their own actions, and can give good thought to that. And that's a place for family values and your family and parental voice to be heard, and it really empowering parents. I think so many parents today think, well, they're influenced by friends, they're influenced by social media, the eye rolling and the hand waving, they're not listening to me. And the data, I encourage every parent to look up the statistics on the power of their voice on young adults is enormous. And making sure they're speaking up, talking freely about topics, if nothing else, not even saying you should or you shouldn't binge drink, but just saying this is what worries me about binge drinking.
So research shows that even if you don't think they're getting through to them, a little bit of it is getting through.
You are getting through to them. And we see this when we do these retrospective studies on choices around risky behavior or various decision making around really critical aspects of one's life and value system. Parental narrative is still huge in a young adult's decision-making factors. And we see that as these young adults kind of get into their next chapter of even their married life, right? You see family values weave through these generations.
So how do you, because I have noted here that you encourage that you come up with a plan for staying connected when they leave home, so that when they leave, you haven't called me in a week. So is that something you discuss beforehand? Hey, I want you to check in with me every Wednesday. Or what do you suggest?
Yeah, I think some sort of communication pattern so they know what to expect from you and you know what to expect from them. Certainly what you don't want to become is a policing or a checking in that becomes nagging or one where your college student is pushing you away. At the same point, college students don't want to be abandoned either. They want their parents to remain engaged with them. Sometimes empty nesters are also excited about their newfound freedom and independence. So just finding a natural rapport that feels natural to your interaction. And nowadays with text and Instagram and DMs and phone calls, a quick touch point is really easy to do. Keeping it warm, keeping it supportive. I would pull back from lecturing or kind of tutoring tone and word choice, because that's probably not helpful with the miles and distance in between you, because at the end of the day, you want them picking up the phone and calling you, particularly when they're in a challenged spot or need some advice.
Do you suggest that transition to college is a good time for the parents to give a little rope? Maybe they stop tracking them on their phone, or they give them their own credit card that they have to pay the bill for. Mom and dad aren't paying the bill. Is this an opportunity where parents can give kids a little more independence?
Absolutely, right? We need to hold our kids accountable, just as we can think back to elementary years when we gave more space on various things, or when they were teens and we let them stay home alone. We need to give that space so that they can practice accountability with the safety net of us present. I mean, how many college kids have been irresponsible with the first-time credit card and found themselves in new debt that parents needed to assist with, right? That's a mistake, and they will make mistakes with their newfound freedom around money, time management, choices, and there will be times that they're coming back for your assistance as a parent, but if we don't push them to have that accountability and make mistakes, really how do you learn?
Bottom line, have these conversations now before they leave.
Before they leave. You know, it's never too late to start. I had a conversation this past week with a parent who just said, well, we're not that kind of family. We don't talk about those kind of things. And I get that, you know, particularly around a kind of a Midwest value system around communication. But ultimately, those conversations, as hard and awkward as they may be, are investments to your kids' future successes and well-being.
Okay. Dr. Madeleine Gagnon, you always have such great advice. You run Pulse Parents. You can find them on Instagram and Facebook. Maddie joins us every week, and she always has the best advice, so we appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
We're going to go to break. We'll be back after this.